We believe brain health is a human right. We believe it's a social and economic imperative. At ABI, we're democratizing global brain health by giving people access to the best minds and evidence-based information from around the world. Together, we are distilling complex science and turning it into actionable knowledge for everyone, everywhere. Will you join us?
A continuing welcome, all of you, to Aspen Brain Institute's 2021 Expert Series. It is my supreme pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Andrew Huberman, neuroscientist, professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford University School of Medicine. My personal challenge in this introduction is to exercise restraint, as Dr. Huberman's body of work is vast and of profound clinical import. I would refer you to his bio on our website for full details, as we do not want to take away even minutes from what we know will be a compelling and valuable presentation. But two highlights: Dr. Huberman's day job in the Huberman Labs includes, amongst many other initiatives, curing blindness, which he and his team have done, for starters, in mice. Many of us know him through the vehicle of his immensely popular Huberman Lab Podcast, which fascinates us with critical neuroscience topics, including health, mood, learning, and performance. He translates cutting-edge science into actionable advice that changes lives, and that is an understatement. So no more adjectives, far better. Welcome, Dr. Huberman.
Well, thank you so much for that incredibly kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here today and to share with you what I hope will be both interesting and actionable. We're going to talk about this incredible thing that we call the nervous system, which is the connections within our brain, but also the connections between the brain and body, and from the body back to the brain, because it turns out that the brain-body connection is incredibly powerful for modulating and controlling what we call our states of mind, our states of body, and in doing so, it becomes powerful for allowing us to focus when we need to focus, to defocus and sleep when we need to sleep, to enter creative states, to enter states of calm when we're feeling too stressed. The nervous system really is the effector by which all of our thoughts, our emotions, and our feelings arise. And so today we're going to learn about the nervous system briefly, and then we're going to talk about our ability to control our nervous system in real time and how that can enhance our ability to perform in a huge variety of contexts. So I'm going to remain with you here, but I am going to share with you some slides in order for this to be as clear as possible. And the title of my talk is effectively the Neuroscience of Change, Tools for Operating at High Performance. This is work that's being done by my laboratory at Stanford, as well as in collaboration with David Spiegel's lab and other laboratories at Stanford. Today we're going to define the logic of what high performance is and what it means to have tools for change and high performance. We're going to talk about the naturally occurring mechanisms, the way that the nervous system can do all this inspirational and aspirational stuff that you see all the time. But in learning how it's done, we are also going to talk about how we can access those mechanisms in each and every one of us. And we're going to talk about how to test and deploy tools. So it won't just be information, it will be actionable advice. I won't be giving any direct recommendations, but the tools, as you'll see, are available for you to use in the contexts that feel right to you. And I just want to mention that all of the tools are grounded in the natural biology of our nervous system. They don't require any devices. They don't require ingestion of anything, except in some cases oxygen. So we'll begin with the nervous system. I'm just going to give a very brief overview. So this is very overly simplistic, I realize, but the brain, of course, sits within the skull, but there are all these little wires that we call axons that emanate from the brain and that into the body and that go back from the body into the brain. I think many people don't realize that every one of our organs is communicating directly with the brain, and the brain is communicating directly with those organs. So yes, indeed, we have connections from our heart to our brain and our brain to our heart. We have connections from our lungs and all the other viscera, our liver, our spleen. In fact, many of you have probably heard and felt before that stress can be bad for the immune system. But in fact, the immune system doesn't know what to do under normal circumstances when there's an invader in our body. The nervous system actually tells the immune system when to deploy these killer cells and things to gobble up bacteria, attack viruses, and so forth. So that's just one example of how the nervous system is linking the brain and body, the immune system, brain, the heart and brain, the digestive system and brain. So we should just take a step back briefly and ask, what does the nervous system do? What is its primary responsibility? And its primary responsibility is to create sensations, which are simply our ability to translate physical events in the universe, light, sound waves, tastes, smells, to convert those into the language of the nervous system, which is electrical activity and chemicals. Perceptions are the sensations that we are paying attention to. So if I tell you to right now pay attention to the weight of clothing on your body, you probably weren't thinking about that before. But the moment you shift your attention to that, you are perceiving those sensations, but they're always ongoing in the background. Perceptions are quite simply the sensations that you happen to be paying attention to. Your feelings are also called emotions. They involve a combination of paying attention or perceiving things outside of us, but also perception of what we call interoception, what's going on inside our mind and our body. And then thoughts are somewhat similar, although thoughts draw very heavily on the past, the present, and sometimes also the future. So feelings and thoughts are a little bit abstract. We'll talk more about those. And then actions, which of course are behaviors. One of the primary functions of the nervous system is to make sure that your digestion is working, that your limbs can move in the ways that you want, and so forth. But today, believe it or not, we're going to talk about the most powerful aspect of the nervous system, which is one that often is considered kind of boring or just for quote unquote housekeeping functions, things like heartbeat, respiration, and digestion. It's sometimes called the autonomic nervous system, but that's a misnomer because autonomic means automatic. This is the aspect of our nervous system, the wires and connections between our brain and body that control what we call our level of arousal, our level of alertness versus calmness. And you'll see in a few moments why that is such an important system. Let's think about what I call the arousal continuum. Arousal is just a different word for alertness. We could be in a coma, nobody wants that. We could be deeply asleep, sometimes that's good. We can be drowsy, we can be alert and calm. We can be highly alert, like urgently waiting for something that's important. We can be stressed. We can be very stressed, or we can be in a state of panic. So there's a continuum of arousal, and it's handled by this aspect of our nervous system called the autonomic nervous system, meaning you don't have to think about how to get stressed, it just happens. You don't think about getting sleepy. Once every 24 hours or so, you get sleepy. But it's very clear that these points along the continuum, panic, very stressed, and stress, are not optimal for most activities. They serve their function even in modern day. I disagree with the idea that stress is just an unfortunate carryover from when we were hunted by other animals. But these states most of the time feel unpleasant, bias us towards impulsive action. So if you see something upsetting on the news or on Twitter and you find yourself impulsively needing to respond, your autonomic nervous system has ramped up your level of attention. They will impair immunity if you are in a state of stress for too long. In the short term, as I mentioned, stress actually activates the immune system in positive ways. In the long term, it depletes it. And it gives us poorer mental and physical health outcomes in the long run. Deep sleep, on the other hand, restores our mental and physical well-being, heals physical wounds and psychological wounds, I should mention, through particular states of dreaming, and reinforces learning. It's actually in deep sleep that our brain rewires. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change in response to experience, is triggered in wakeful states but is reinforced in sleep. Without sleep, there is no brain change. So alert and calm is optimal for most waking activities, and deep sleep is great for learning and restorative functions. And so my laboratory has taken the perspective, I've taken the perspective that the two states of mind and body that would be wonderful if we could learn how to access on a regular basis deliberately would be alert and calm or deeply asleep. There are other very interesting states, states of flow, states of creativity, etc. But those all stem from being either alert and calm or deeply asleep. Those are the kind of basic macronutrients of other states. So rather than go for what I call highly desirable states like creativity or focus as their own thing, we're trying to build up from first principles of what states are actually created from, with the understanding, or at least our belief, that deep sleep and a state of alertness yet calm, alert and calm, are powerful for moving through most of life and for wiring the brain in ways that serve us better. So what controls our levels of alertness and calmness? They are controlled by this thing called the autonomic nervous system. Again, so-called autonomic because it actually has voluntary control points. If you look at the image here, you'll see that there's a green bar here at the pelvis and in the cervical region, and then a red bar down the middle of the spine. I don't want to go into a lot of details of neuroanatomy, but it turns out that neurons that reside in the upper spine and in the lower spine, the pelvis and cervical spine, are responsible for calming functions. It's sometimes called the parasympathetic nervous system, so-called because it's para, or near, the sympathetic nervous system, which is a chain of neurons, literally called the sympathetic chain ganglia for the aficionados, of neurons that under conditions of high alertness and stress are activated like a chain of dominoes all at once. But the naming is confusing because the moment people hear sympathetic, they think sympathy and calmness and kindness, whereas sympathetic simply means together, sympa, together. And so today we're not going to call it the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. We are going to refer to this beautiful aspect of our nervous system that controls housekeeping functions like heartbeat, respiration, and digestion, and controls our level of arousal and our level of calmness as the calmness system and the alertness system. Okay, so in green, I'm just referring to the neurons that control calmness, and in red, the ones that control alertness. That's all you need to know. And this system is vitally important because it dictates which sensations, which emotions, which feelings, which thoughts, and which actions are more likely. The autonomic nervous system controls the probability that you will feel a certain way. It controls the probability that you can be creative or not, or focused or not. The probability that you can allow your mind to, for instance, parse time differently. When we are stressed, we find sliced time. If you've ever been in line at the supermarket or late for a trip, and somebody is in front of you, it feels like they're moving incredibly slowly when you're stressed. And that's because you're actually fine slicing time. Your time perception is shifted such that your frame rate, if you will, is higher. Whereas when you're very calm, staring at the clouds, laying back on a sunny afternoon, and you're very, very calm internally, your parasympathetic nervous system is dominant. It seems like things are moving very fast. And if you've ever been fatigued and the world around you feels like it's moving very fast or too fast, you feel kind of overwhelmed, that's because you're parsing time differently. So I can't emphasize it enough how important this system is. So let's think of it like a seesaw, not as two separate systems. When the sympathetic nervous system or alertness system is more active relative to the parasympathetic nervous system, we would call that panic or stress. When the parasympathetic nervous system is more active in this kind of seesaw fashion, we call it drowsy or sleepy. And when they're even, we are alert and calm. Very simple. So think of your internal state as a seesaw between alertness and calmness. I want to emphasize just how powerful this system is. When you are in a state of stress or heightened alertness, your pupils dilate. There are changes in the optics of your eye, and you actually would view a forest as a single tree. You have extreme acuity and precision of detail visible to you in this tree, but not the surround. Whereas when you are calm, somewhat paradoxically, the pupil gets smaller, but you can see more of your surroundings. You can see the whole forest and you can get more perception of more things both in space and time. You can parse time differently than here. So the stress system was designed for you to be able to track individual things very precisely. And when you're in a state of calm, space and time becomes very fluid. And if you're very calm, for instance, in a dream, if this were a dream, space and time would be so fluid that, my bulldog Costello could float through the screen upside down, and then my deceased great-grandmother could come sit down and start talking to us, and it wouldn't seem like a problem to you because the brain is very able and more willing to entertain different space-time regimes, different ways of thinking about information when in a state of deep calm, as opposed to when we are stressed. We become literally rigid about our processing of space and time. So first, let's attack stress. Let's get some tools on the table here. A scientifically grounded framework for combating stress would be a framework that would allow us to access the features of our nervous system that can turn on calm when we're stressed. That would mean decreasing sympathetic activation, increasing parasympathetic. All it really is getting calm. And one of the things that's very important to me and to my lab, and through my collaboration with David Spiegel, Dr. David Spiegel, who is our Associate Chair of Psychiatry at Stanford, are tools that allow real-time adjustments. Meditation, massage, vacation, a nice glass of wine, if you're of drinking age, they work to calm you down. The problem is they often don't allow you to continue to engage in the stress-inducing activity. So real-time adjustments to stress, and what would be wonderful would be to decrease the threshold for stress, meaning make yourself more resilient. We hear about resilience, mental toughness, and grit, but those are just referring to adjectives, right? Or sometimes we can conceive of them in different ways, but I want to create those as verbs, biological processes that you can access. What is it to be resilient? How can you be resilient as a biological process? So I ask, how is our nervous system normally wired for this to occur? And it turns out, literally, that the Earth is spinning, it's turning once every 24 hours on its axis. For part of that, the Earth is bathed in sunlight, and for the other half, it's not, more or less. Days vary in length, nights vary in length, depending on the tilt of the Earth and the time of year, of course. But this is actually the most basic and fundamental way in which your level of alertness and calmness are adjusted on a daily basis. And if this sounds very distant from stress, in a moment it will become clear what I'm talking about. The only way in which you perceive these shifts in the position of the Earth relative to the sun is via the neural retina, the eyes. The neural retina are two pieces of your brain, of your central nervous system, that lie outside the cranial vault. They're the only two pieces of your brain outside the cranial vault. They are literally two pieces of brain. Anyone who tells you differently is wrong. They are central nervous system. And they speak directly to centers of the brain, which I've just denoted here, this red cube, that are controlling the level of alertness or calmness in the rest of the body. This little cube has a name. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, if you'd like to know. It releases factors that time your digestion, time your alertness, time your ability to think, time your ability to feel. It's adjusting hormones and chemicals throughout every cell and every tissue and organ in your body. And the way it works is like this. When it's light out and when the eyes are perceiving a lot of sunlight, there's a shift in your internal milieu toward alertness. And when there's lack of light, there's a shift in your internal milieu toward calmness. And if you're an insomniac and you say, hey, the lights go down at night, the sun goes down at night, and I'm still wide awake, we can actually help resolve that problem today. The reason this is powerful, the way it shapes your alertness and calmness, is that morning viewing of light. When you see light, in particular sunlight, early in the day, you get an increase in cortisol, which is a stress hormone, but it's a healthy increase that you want to increase. It wakes you up, and then it drops across the daytime, and it should be low in the evening. In fact, a late shifted bump in cortisol, if this red line were over here, or if there was a second peak, is a signature of anxiety and depression, as seen in many clinical studies. These little X's are little life events: troubling text message, someone didn't do something they said they were going to do, you don't like the news, etc. Those little blips in cortisol are natural, they're healthy, and they're short-lived. But you want this cortisol bump early, and you want melatonin, another hormone, to come up late to allow you to fall asleep. Melatonin is the hormone of darkness. It is suppressed by sunlight. The simple way to encapsulate all this is with protocols. When you view sunlight in the morning and in the evening, you are giving the brain and the rest of your body, every tissue in the body, every cell, the two signals it needs most of when to be alert and when to be asleep. It needs to anchor to something, and it needs to anchor to the rise and fall of the sun. You do not need to see the sun cross the horizon, but you want to see the sun when it's at so-called low solar angle early in the day and when it's heading towards setting and crossing the horizon in the evening. Even if it's cloudy out, there's a lot of photons, light energy coming through, and it's actually the contrast between yellow and blue wavelengths, not blue light, that sets your clock. If you're wearing blue blockers in the middle of the day, you are shooting yourself in the foot in terms of the quality of your sleep and the timing of your alertness. The protocols are as follows. The cells in the eye that respond best to the sun when it's at low solar angle are, for the aficionados, are blue off, yellow on cells of the so-called melanopsin variety, but the names don't matter. You need to see contrast between yellows and blues. That's best accomplished by viewing the sunlight, not with sunglasses, not by staring directly into the sun to the point that it's painful, but by getting bright light in your eyes early in the day and as the sun is setting. So here's the protocol that will establish the optimal states of alertness and calmness and aid in the transition to sleep as well. You want to view sunlight soon after waking. Light sensitivity is low in the morning, so you need to view a lot of photons. If you're in Scandinavia in the depths of winter, this means looking at an artificial device that's designed to simulate sunlight. If you are in pretty much anywhere else in the world, you just want to get outside for anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes. You don't want to stare directly at the sunlight. You always know if it's too bright because you'll have to close your eyes. So never look at anything so bright that's painful to look at. If you have macular degeneration or glaucoma, you want to be a little extra careful not to get too much light in your eyes. But for most people, it's extremely effective to just go outside and get some indirect sunlight in your eyes, no sunglasses, never compromise safety, find to wear prescription lenses, find to wear contacts. The yellow-blue contrast that's characteristic of low solar angle sunlight is optimal. Through a window is 50 times less effective. It will take you most of the day staring at the sun through a window to accomplish what you could accomplish in 3 minutes of bright sunlight viewing early in the day. It is still occurring when it's overcast. If you're a quantitative type, there's a free app called Light Meter, which you can measure the total brightness through lux, and there's a lux meter as well. You don't need to do that. Just go outside, get some bright light within an hour of waking up. If you wake up before the sun comes out, flip on as many bright lights inside as possible. The simple rule is during the day and morning, you want as much bright light in your eyes as possible if your goal is to be awake. Then it's especially important to avoid bright lights, especially bright overhead lights, between the hours of 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. and probably 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. I'll talk about shift work in a moment and people who work the night shift. But light sensitivity of the retina is very high at night, so it takes very few photons to disrupt melatonin. Light inhibits melatonin, and light will, in the middle of the night, will disrupt dopamine production. Dopamine is a molecule associated not just with reward and feelings of well-being, but also motivation and pursuit. It is the molecule of craving and pursuit, sometimes in unhealthy ways with addiction, but the worst thing you could do is get bright light in your eyes. So blue light at night is bad, but so is all forms of bright light. So if you're into the blue blocker thing and you like wearing blue blockers, do that in the evening, not in the daytime. There's a big misconception there that we should be avoiding blue light. Blue light is wonderful during the daytime and anytime you want to be alert, and blue light is terrible anytime you want to be asleep or you're thinking about being asleep soon. And there's another time of day, which is view sunlight as it sets in the evening or flip on some overhead lights inside. Viewing low solar angle light in the evening partially offsets the negative effects of nighttime light by adjusting retinal sensitivity. And I call this the Netflix inoculation, so that you can actually stay up and look at Netflix or be on your computer at night without disrupting your internal rhythms of alertness and calmness. There's some references down below. The second thing I'd like to cover is not about light, but about breathing. And I'm going to move through this somewhat quickly, but rather than talk about breath work, you're probably hearing a lot now with James Nestor's book on breath, The New Science of a Lost Art, a lot of interest in Wim Hof type breathing, and some of you may be familiar with Kundalini breathing and Tumo breathing. But breathing has a direct effect on our levels of alertness and calmness in a way that we can leverage and use in real time to focus and be alert when we want to focus and be alert, and to aid the transition to calmness and to sleep. And it works like this. This is actually a scan of the diaphragm, which is a skeletal muscle inside of that moves up and down as we breathe. And this is the heart beating. These are the lungs. So there's a beautiful relationship between the brain, the heart, and the diaphragm and the lungs. And we can make it very simple. When when we inhale, our diaphragm moves down. So when we inhale, our diaphragm moves down, which creates a little bit more space in our thoracic cavity, and our heart physically gets a little bit bigger. Blood flows more slowly through that slightly larger heart volume, and neurons in the heart, called the sinoatrial node, communicate to the brain that the blood is flowing more slowly through the heart. As a consequence, when we inhale, the brain sends a signal back to the heart to speed the heart up. Conversely, when we exhale, the diaphragm moves up, the heart gets a little bit smaller, blood flows more quickly through that smaller volume, and the sinoatrial node communicates to the brain through a series of synapses, and the brain sends a signal back to slow the heart down. In other words, inhaling speeds the heart up, and exhaling slows the heart down. So if you're feeling stressed, or someone you know is feeling stressed, or your level of alertness and calmness isn't quite where you want it to be, you need to adjust it, and you can do that using breathing. This is not breath work. This is real-time adjustment of alertness and calmness. It has a name for those of you who are medically oriented, which is respiratory sinus arrhythmia. The arrhythmia part makes it sound bad, but this is just simply how breathing and heart rate are linked through the nervous system. And so it's very simple. If you are feeling too stressed and you want to calm down, do not take a big deep breath. Just dump all your air. Exhale long and then go back to breathing normally. Or inhale, but make your exhales a little bit longer. Conversely, if you're not feeling awake enough and you need to be more alert, chances are your system is shifting towards parasympathetic, toward more calmness. The solution there is to make your inhales a little bit deeper and more vigorous than your exhales. Now you might say, well, sooner or later I have to balance that air. I can't just keep inhaling more than exhaling or exhaling more than inhaling. I'll either overload or run out of air. You do this 2 or 3 times, and then you'll find that you can bring your nervous system exactly where you want it to be. It's like an accelerator and a brake on a car. Very, very simple. So breathing controls heart rate variability. This is the basis of heart rate variability. The second tool that is breathing based, which is very useful, is something called the physiological sigh. There's a hardwired neural circuit mechanism for rapidly de-stressing. When you breathe, you're not just bringing air into your lungs, you're bringing air into millions, literally, of little sacs in your lungs, which are the alveoli of the lungs. If we were to spread out the sacs in your lungs, it'd be as big as a tennis court. When you get stressed or exhausted, these little sacs in the lungs collapse like balloons, and your goal and your need is to reinflate them to bring more oxygen into the system and to get rid of what we call carbon dioxide, which does many important things, but too much of it in your bloodstream is correlated with a feeling of stress. So physiological sighs were discovered in the 30s. They've also been studied by Mark Krasno and Jack Feldman's lab at Stanford and UCLA respectively. And they are an interesting pattern of breathing that you do periodically in sleep whenever these little sacs in your lungs collapse or carbon dioxide goes too high. And physiological sighs are very simple. It's 2 inhales followed by an exhale. Normally we have rhythmic breathing, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. When you do 2 inhales back to back, followed by an extended exhale, you maximize the calming response. So it's inhale, inhale, exhale. Inhale, inhale, exhale. And this is ideally done through the nose. So it's, you can do it once and you'll notice an immediate drop in your stress level. Repeat that maybe 2 or 3 times and you will be very calm. It takes a few seconds for the heart to slow down. You don't want your heart rate to drop too fast. That's not good. The heart rate will always lag. But a double inhale, exhale is the fastest way that I'm aware of to engage the physiology of calm. So it's inhale, inhale, and then a long exhale to dump or effectively remove carbon dioxide. So physiological sighs, where we do this in sleep, we do it in claustrophobic environments. Children do this after sobbing. Adults do as well. It's controlled, if you would like to know and read more about, by a special structure called the parafacial nucleus in the brainstem, separate from the normal breathing apparatus. It's, again, the fastest way that I'm aware of that when you're feeling too stressed to dump air. Now, this is a talk about the neuroscience of change. If those of you who exercise and do steady state cardio or into weightlifting or any kind of physical exertion, you can do physiological sighs repeatedly as you're in exertion, and you'll notice that you can be at a much higher output while maintaining calm. As well, if you're into the weightlifting thing, or you're out of air and you need to recover air, or you just sprinted for the airplane gate or something, you do a double inhale, exhale, and that will quickly recover your ability to breathe. So it's a really powerful technique in many ways. And it's not the sort of thing you do as breath work necessarily. It's something that you do, again, in real time. Okay, moving right along, I'd like to give you more tools. I just want to briefly cover a study. I'm not going to go into the details. My lab and David Spiegel's lab have been asking what tools actually work to buffer stress and resilience, both in real time and when done for what we call the minimal effective dose. So we've been comparing mindful meditation in 25 subjects, slow breathing of the sort I just described, inhale, exhales, these repeated sighs, box breathing, which is inhale, hold, exhale, hold, repeat, or superoxygenation breathing. A note about superoxygenation breathing. Superoxygenation breathing is also called Wim Hof breathing, Tumo breathing. It's developed long before Wim Hof, long before Tumo, frankly. It involves deliberately hyperventilating. So it looks, I'll do it even though it looks kind of silly. It's 25 or 30 breaths like that is very effective in bringing levels of adrenaline, also called epinephrine, up in your system. You are self-inducing stress. And then you exhale your air and you try and remain relaxed with all this adrenaline in your system. The same thing can be accomplished by getting into a cold shower or an ice bath. It's a form of self-induced stress inoculation. So we've been comparing 5 minutes a day of mindful meditation, 5 minutes a day of slow breathing, sighs, 5 minutes a day of box breathing, or 5 minutes a day of what I call superoxygenation breathing. Just to mention, superoxygenation breathing also involves getting rid of a lot of carbon dioxide, which means that you don't have the impulse to breathe. And I should mention, you never want to do it anywhere near water, not even in a puddle, a bath, or while swimming, because when you remove the impulse to breathe, you are prone to shallow water blackout. So it can be dangerous. So never do superoxygenation breathing anywhere associated with water. Free divers know this. In fact, many free divers die because they adjust down the reflex to breathe so efficiently that they're at depth, and it's not like they're even flickering out. Just everything goes black and they drown. But on land, superoxygenation breathing is a way of self-inducing stress. These other forms of breath work or meditation are calming. So we've been evaluating a huge number of metrics I won't go into now, short-term and long-term effects on trait anxiety, sleep, heart rate variability, the PANAS, are positive affect, negative affect scales, state anxiety. And the long and short of this is that the left graph just shows a significant change in positive affect, which are slow breathing, box breathing, and superoxygenation breathing, are all more effective than meditation. 5 minutes a day. It's not to say meditation isn't useful, but for a minimal effective dose, a breathwork protocol is extremely powerful for allowing you to learn to shift your state and to control your state. Of those, superoxygenation breathing, the cyclic breathing, the intense breathing I just showed you, that is actually not ideal if you have or are prone to anxiety attacks. So please forgive the noise in the background. That's my bulldog Costello, who's prone to no anxiety whatsoever. The bulldog is an incredibly parasympathetic dominant breed, which is part of what makes them so delightful. It's very hard to induce stress in a bulldog. Humans, quite easy. So avoid superoxygenation breathing if you're prone to anxiety. What it does do, however, is it teaches you to be comfortable at higher levels of anxiety. I'll just steal from my colleague, Dr. Spiegel's statement, because he captures it better than I ever could, by saying it's not just about the state that you're in, it's about whether or not you had anything to do with placing yourself in that state, right? So self-induced stress is different than world-induced and life-induced stress. So I encourage people to have real-time tools, the physiological sigh, emphasizing exhales as ways to calm down, emphasizing inhales as ways to be more alert, See morning light, see evening light as ways to balance your alertness and calmness correctly across the 24-hour cycle. Avoid bright light of all colors in the middle of the night. If you have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night or for safety reasons, you flip on a light for a few seconds, no big deal. But if you're looking at your phone in the middle of the night or you're spending a lot of time on bright screens and you're not looking at light early in the day when you wake up, it should be no wonder that you're having trouble focusing, having trouble staying asleep at night, having trouble accessing the states of mind you want, because the seesaw is not effectively tuned right. It's like the hinge on your seesaw is too loose and you're getting stuck over here or stuck over there and it's getting blown around quite a lot. What you want is for that seesaw to have the hinge not too tight but not too loose either. And these practices, of light viewing at particular times, avoiding light at particular times, using the breathing apparatus to adjust your levels of alertness and calmness. These are the innate ways in which our nervous system has built up the capacity to control alertness and calmness consciously. So these mechanisms work subconsciously and reflexively when we're stressed or when we're exhausted, but you can take advantage of them and use their power to control the rest of your nervous system by just simply knowing what they are. The beauty of this is it doesn't require any learning. You just have to know what the tools are, and then once you do them, they work the first time and they work every time. So the rational structure for stress mitigation is the rational structure for changing your brain in the ways that you want. Real-time tools for immediate stress relief. You can raise stress threshold by self-inducing stress and then remaining calm. You can increase what's called parasympathetic tone also through something called non-sleep deep rest. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but non-sleep deep rest is the way that I describe, it's an acronym I came up with to describe things like yoga nidra or exhale emphasized meditation. Anytime you're deliberately bringing your brain into a state of deep relaxation, you optimize it for neuroplasticity, for change. We know, and I said this at the beginning, but I'll say it again, that when there's a intense focus, that is the trigger for neuroplasticity, for the brain to change. As adults, we don't learn simply by experiencing things. We need to have extreme focus. That means being alert. Unfortunately, negative events capture that automatically. But the real change comes in deep sleep. And there's a beautiful study published in Cell Reports, Cell Press Journal, excellent journal, this last year, showing that a 20-minute to 30-minute non-sleep deep rest or shallow nap, you don't even need to fall asleep, after a period of learning, and it doesn't have to be immediately after, accelerates learning. If you want to get better, you want to move through traumas more quickly, you're doing hard therapy or hard learning or trying to learn or access creativity, a 20-minute non-sleep deep rest protocol each day is extremely powerful, even 3 times a week. So there are 2 of them. One, I will provide a link for all listeners to. It's on the web, although if you prefer something like Yoga Nidra, you can. But what we've developed is a protocol that strips away intentions and a number of the other things that are associated with Yoga Nidra. The reason for that is sometimes the kind of mystical language can be a separator for people. We've only focused on the breathing, and it involves a sort of body scan as well. The other one, the other tool that's very powerful for rewiring your nervous system is one that was developed again by my colleague, Dr. David Spiegel, which is you can go to reverie.com, and there's now also a Reverie app, both for Android and Mac. These are clinically tested as well as research tested hypnosis scripts lasting about 15 minutes to access deep rest each day, and you guide yourself through it. Now, people think hypnosis, they think stage hypnosis and pendants and people walking around like chickens. This is you deliberately inducing a state of hypnosis while listening to the script so that you can, for instance, experience greater relief from pain. There's actually pain relief protocols there. There's sleep protocols to get better at falling asleep, stress protocols, and so forth. And you can use those as a way, the anti-stress protocol as a way to access these states of non-sleep deep rest to maximize neural plasticity and learning. So the real science of change, I will say, is in the ability to be focused when you want to be focused, be alert when you want to be alert, and then to be calm and in states of non-sleep deep rest or deep sleep when you want to reinforce the learning and reinforce the change. Because again, that's when the actual reorganization of connections between neurons occurs, in deep sleep or non-sleep deep rest. So I've given you a variety of tools, a lot of science to go with it as well. So as we move through these protocols, and I've taught you some protocols and how your nervous system works, it's it's kind of fun, and actually I think it's important to take a step back and ask ourselves where we are in the historical perspective. There's my bulldog drinking again. A historical perspective of brain change and self-directed brain change. On the left, we have an image of Ken Kesey, who, and his magic bus. And, Ken and his friends were very involved in the neuroscience of change from a completely different perspective, psychedelic medicine, exploration of different meditative states, etc. Long before Wim Hof, there was Maurice Debard. He's now 90, very much into cold exposure as a way to condition and wake up the nervous system and to encourage people to activate their immune system. Believe it or not, adrenaline, as I mentioned before, will activate your immune system. That's why getting into cold water activates and primes your immune system. At least in the short term, it's very good for the immune system. There's a paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences showing that when we release adrenaline, we also release things like IL-10, which are anti-inflammatory markers. You can reduce the symptoms of bacterial infections and things using cold as a stimulus. But it's not cold per se. It's not rapid breathing per se. It's adrenaline, which signals to the immune system that something is causing an invasion and we need to push back on it. So this was the history of it. And it's always seemed a little wacky, magic buses and people like this bearded Iceman and, in cold water. Nowadays, we have the modern Iceman. This was on the cover of the Wall Street Journal just recently. I know Wim, he's a big proponent of getting into cold. Here he is looking rather Maurice Debard-like or a little bit Ken Kesey-like on an iceberg with a guitar. But we've also got laboratories at major universities now studying the effects of cold on the immune system, cold on the nervous system and our ability to buffer stress. So while these characters are rather colorful, the practices are being now distilled down to the underlying physiology. Similarly, the first run at psychedelics and their role in brain states and shifting brain states and neuroplasticity in the 60s and 70s, frankly, was a little haphazard. It didn't go so well from the standpoint of psychiatric medicine. And it's only recently that places like NYU Medical Center, Johns Hopkins, and other places are now carrying out very rigorous tests of how psychedelics can inform trauma treatment as well as depression treatment and other brain states. And I don't point out the wackiness and the modern rigor as a way to emphasize good or bad, but simply that the goal of science, I'll just remind everybody, the goal of science is to figure out what are the key variables, right? So there are laboratories now trying to figure out whether or not there are non-psychedelic versions of the compounds that can relieve depression that might aid in the treatment of depression and PTSD. My lab doesn't work on that. But we do work on things like respiration and the effects on heart rate variability. We're very interested in the effects of cold. I have a colleague at Stanford, Craig Heller, who works on the effects of cold on human performance. But oftentimes what we see as the kind of more wellness-wrapped or kind of colorful or sometimes even wacky aspects of things that perhaps and every once in a while actually do have a kernel of real physiological truth. And it's once we understand the mechanism that then we can build new and better protocols. And so that's the goal of my lab and these other labs, is to figure out what are the compounds, how do they change the brain, what are the protocols with breathing and with cold, how do they shift our nervous system ways that allow us to access neuroplasticity and sleep and focus better. So science is sorting through its own identity search for identity. I won't call it an identity crisis these days, in terms of trying to figure out what aspects of the nervous system are tractable and modifiable. And hopefully today you've learned some things that point to the fact that clearly there are aspects of our nervous system that are modifiable and that you can engage on a regular basis. And you don't have to engage in any, you certainly don't have to take psychedelics or sit on icebergs or drive in magic buses or go swimming in ice cold water. That's not the point. The point is that we all have mechanisms that are deeply embedded in all of us, our physiology, that we can leverage towards changing our nervous system so that we can accomplish those two states that are so vital, which are deep sleep when we want that and alert and calm when we want that. And again, from those two states, all the other important states emerge. And so I just want to finish. I won't go name by name, but these are some of the people involved in this work. Dr. Spiegel, Dr. Zeitzer from the Stanford Sleep Center, Dr. Yilmaz, and Bita Ronnie, Gary Hall, Dr. Miller Codon, Eric Neri is camera shy here, but nonetheless was important for this work. And our group has been trying to sort out these mechanisms. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share some of the emerging tools. I should mention these are emerging tools, some published data, some stuff still in progress, but I hope that you'll explore them and put them to your benefit because, as I mentioned before, they work the first time and they work every time because they are grounded in the deep architecture and hardware and software of our nervous system.
Andrew, thank you. Thank you for, not surprisingly, an eloquent and elegant presentation. You, sir, are, despite wearing black, are a pretty colorful character yourself. And I've noticed I'm so calm now that I've moved from calling you Dr. Huberman to Andrew with your.
Oh, please just call him Andrew. Just Andrew is fine. Yeah, that's fine.
So, Andrew, we are living in the age of 60-second TikTok clips and sound bites. And despite this, close to 8 million people have listened to you be interviewed by Rich Roll for over 2 hours. Hundreds of thousands, and exponentially counting more and more each time, are now listening to your new 90-minute weekly Huberman Lab podcast, which began in January. I'm going to begin to answer my own question, and then we'll turn it over to you. I believe that your success reflects the richness and the generosity of your storytelling. You remind us that science is, in fact, a team sport by synthesizing so much information from so many resources and by crediting your sources. Your core messaging is authentic, it's actionable, you reduce the complexity of science, you never dilute it to the absurd, and you do remind us that science requires hard work and attention and focus to understand it properly, and you reassure us that rewards await us at the other end, and indeed they do. Andrew, you emphasize and have just demonstrated that teaching mechanisms of action in neuroscience is critical. Can you discuss that a little bit further and explain why, in your opinion, that is so important?
Thank you. I'm very indebted to people like you and to Rich Roll and Joe Rogan, Lex Fridman, people who have been kind enough to host me and give me an opportunity to share, because science is wonderful and beautiful, but unfortunately a lot of it is vaulted in language and vaulted in manuscripts and vaulted in ways that prevents it from getting to the very people that it was designed to serve. So one of the reasons I like to include some mechanism is because I truly believe that understanding a little bit of mechanism accomplishes three things. First of all, it gives us reassurance that what we're doing isn't just a hack. It's not hacking into something. One reason I'm not a big fan of the word biohacking is that it sort of implies that we're leveraging one system for sake of another. I mean, I can use the back of I can use a butter knife to unscrew something, to tighten a drawer handle or something, and it'll work pretty well. But it doesn't really emphasize the great many roles that knife has for other purposes, or the fact that there is something called a screwdriver which can actually accomplish that much better and has versatility. So that's the second thing. When you understand mechanism just a little bit, you can start to not only trust a protocol, but you can build versatility into it. So for instance, the physiological sigh is ridiculously simple. I could have just put up a slide and said, hey, anytime you're stressed, just breathe in twice and then breathe out quickly, because that's the quickest way that science tells us is to calm down. But understanding a little bit about carbon dioxide and understanding a little bit about the relationship between the diaphragm and the heart size, and a little bit of this inhale speeds up heart rate, exhale slows it down, embeds knowledge in a way that when we are stressed and when we need a tool, we not only remember that tool, but we are able to leverage it in subtle ways that end up having outsized effects. So for instance, if you're really stressed, I always say it's very hard to control the mind with the mind. You want to look to the body. Then you sort of release the mind from its own grip, and then you can control the mind again. So when people understand mechanism, they have a deeper relationship to the tool. I think it's embedded in their memory better. They reach for that tool, and then they can start playing with it, and they can start realizing, it's not simply the case that you can do 2 exhales and then 1 long inhale. That actually will drive the system in the opposite direction. And now if you understand mechanism, you might understand why when you're breathing very deeply, or you take a deep breath when you're stressed, what you're really doing is you're preventing those sacs in the lungs from reinflating even more. So when you start understanding a little mechanism, you really can get a lot of insight into oneself. Also with light, for instance, if you're not sleeping well or you're waking up at 3 a.m., you have to ask yourself, what was your light viewing behavior in the 2 or 3 days preceding that? Now, most people wake up in the middle of the night, I should mention, use the restroom and go back to sleep. That's not entirely uncommon or bad. I don't think we demonize that. But mechanism is key. And I really believe that my task and the task of other scientists and people in all sorts of communities, sports performance, work performance, psychology, psychiatry, our goal should be to take mechanisms and build better tools. I think where we are today is very rudimentary in terms of the tools. I think that someone will experiment with and discover mechanisms and tools that will allow us to accomplish the brain states we want. I think in 10 years, before we sit down or in 5 years maybe, before we sit down to do a bout of work, we'll probably end up listening to a 1-minute hypnosis. We will probably know to breathe in a certain way as we prepare to do focused work, and that we will probably need to breathe in a certain way as we go to sleep at night. I think that the future lies in understanding mechanism and applying it in novel ways. And if I just give a tool, and there's no mechanism, then there's no opportunity to be iterative and innovative. And the reason I love science is because it's innovative. It doesn't look anything. The truths are core truths, but you build on those core truths so that things don't look anything like they do 10 years from now. If I give the same talk 10 years from now, I hope nobody listens to it, because hopefully by then people will have evolved far better tools.
Well, you certainly remind me of something I learned during my residency, which seems eons ago, my psychiatry residency. There's so little that I learned that is factually relevant today. But what I learned from some real masters was how to think. And really that's what you're advocating.
Yeah, I have many goals in teaching tools in neuroscience, and one of the more cryptic goals is I want people to understand, of course, the beauty and the power of the nervous system, because it is awe-inspiring. I want them to apply it. I also want them to develop a little bit of, if they don't have it or if they already have it, to grow their scientific thinking. And not because I think scientific thinking is the only way to approach life, but looking at things through the lens of neuroscience and through the lens of biology and through the lens of psychology and through the lens of physiology is immensely powerful. And I think for every problem, whether or not it's an interpersonal problem or depression or learning or dyslexia or the climate change, we need to look at that through multiple lenses to converge on a plan of action that's really the best one. And I as a psychiatrist, I'm sure that you will appreciate this. I think that the goal of good, any good therapist or psychiatrist knows that what the patient is really internalizing is not just a story, is a reflective function. It's an algorithm that they somehow understand intuitively, because whether or not they remain in the patient clinician setting forever or not, the point is to understand something, even just intuitively, about how one works through a set of challenges, so that you have more confidence in confronting new challenges. And the same thing is true of mechanism. You know, once you understand your relationship to light and how to feel alert during the day, if that's your goal, and asleep at night, everything changes, because you start to understand your relationship to sensory input and to your environment. And it starts affecting you in very powerful ways. Your relationship to music changes, your relationship to stress changes, but you can't just hand that, I can't just hand that understanding off. And it's something that humans are exquisitely good at finding. When you start with something very tractable and very simple, they start peeling back the layers of the onion, and especially through experience. And I don't claim to be a clinician. I have great admiration and respect for clinicians. That's not what I do. I find and test tools. I forage for tools in the world, and then I bring them to the lab, and I try and understand mechanism and evolve those tools, and then try and give them back to the world. That's the cycle that I'm involved in.
Well, in that capacity, then, it just occurred to me as you were speaking, at the Aspen Brain Institute, we are obviously interested in all things brain. You have spoken so beautifully about understanding the brain, not in isolation, but in the context of the lower ecosystem of the nervous system. So, Andrew, do you think the Aspen Brain Institute should change its name? And if so, any recommendations?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because it gets to, I think the name is wonderful as it is. I don't think it needs to change. I think, you know, the word nervous system, it always makes people think about nervous, the state of being nervous. And so that's the problem. You know, the language of science is dreadful. I just have to say, you know, even just today, I had to, you know, sympathetic, parasympathetic, calmness, alert. It's so, autonomic isn't autonomic. There's a lot of renaming that needs to be done. And yet these are the operational definitions we live with, so that medical students and neuroscience students can train and learn. I think that the understanding that the brain and body are connected in powerful ways was actually outside the realm of neuroscience. I remember as a junior professor, so this was over 10 years ago, someone told me that everything below the neocortex, anyone that works on anything below the neocortex wasn't a neuroscientist. They were a neurobiologist. I won't name this person, but he has a physics background. He actually now works on the brainstem and the breathing apparatus, so it's kind of amusing to me. That's no longer true. And also the experimental models often that we use, including humans, don't allow us to get to the high level questions of consciousness, you know, dreaming, consciousness, free will. Those are the things that everyone always asks me, you know, what's that all about? And we actually understand dreams now a little bit. But consciousness is hard to define, and free will, you know, it's complicated. But when you start getting into the deeper layers of the nervous system, the brainstem, the thalamus, the retina, the way that the viscera and the brain are connected, you can really get to some solid understanding of, well, when activity goes up or when serotonin in the gut is increased, you are going to experience sugar seeking. And this is true in animals and humans, or for instance, the relationship between immunity and the nervous system. So I think that the deeper kind of mechanical stuff, while it doesn't lend itself so well to the beauty of consciousness or awe or these states that are really attractive and fun to talk about, we actually stand to get some real answers in the immediate future. And eventually we will get to those high level, really also important questions. But the short answer is I like the name the Aspen Brain Institute.
You're very kind. So not so much fun to talk about COVID brain, whatever the hell that means. Recent essay in the New York Times entitled, "We've Hit a Wall, Confronting Late Stage pandemic burnout from edibles to exodus, describing the continuing crisis of productivity, of will, of enthusiasm, of purpose. Many of us find ourselves still asking, what time is it? What day is it? What was it that I did in October? And why am I standing in front of the refrigerator yet again? The writer of the piece herself described pushing disjointed words around like peas on a plate, hoping that eventually they would coalesce into sentences. So from the perspective of the nervous system, Andrew, what is that and what can we do about it? Because it ain't over yet.
Yeah. Such an important issue right now, and likely to remain an important issue for a while as this all gets sorted out. So I think that confusion we are literally disoriented in time, not so much space. Most of us know the physical space that we're in, but the natural cycle of going to sleep each night, or if you work the night shift during the day, and waking up and being alert is a process of being in relation to space and time very differently across each 24-hour cycle. Normally you go to sleep, as I mentioned, during dreams, space and time are very fluid. They're kind of untethered. A lot can happen. The nervous system needs that period in order to readjust itself so that it can then perform its most critical role during the daytime, which is to analyze duration, path, and outcome. So we're either in reflexive mode, like if I want to get a glass of water, I just get up and get a glass of water. I don't think right foot, left foot, right arm, turn the faucet. I know how to do all that. I learned it as a child. But when we're learning new things or when we need to concentrate, the brain enters a mode where we're analyzing duration. How long should I do something? Path. What path should I take to accomplish a goal? And then outcome. Am I achieving that goal? And that, for new motor skills, that's literally a motor thing, and reaching and moving, if you're learning to dance or whatever it is. For cognitive or for writing, you're trying to structure thoughts into written word, of course. So that is very taxing. And what's happened in the last 12 to 18 months is that the many cues that were orienting us in space and time through travel or the regular news cycle or excuse me, or meal cycles have been disrupted. So the nervous system is always subconsciously integrating things like, when do I eat? When do I play? When do I see friends? When do I see family? When do I go to the movies? Routines are not just about the performing of those routines. They're about anchoring your nervous system in space and time during the wakeful state, because in the sleep state, you're not anchored in space and time. Excuse me. This is why dogs expect to go out on a walk each day. There's an intrinsic timer at a certain time of day. We're all wired for this regularity. And in the last year, that's all become very disrupted. So the solution until things go back to whatever normal looks like is severalfold. First of all, get control of the sleep-wake cycle. Second of all, and I should just emphasize, that's mainly accomplished by light. Exercise is important, nutrition is important, but light is the primary Zeitgeber, as the circadian biologists like to say, the primary timekeeper. The other thing that's vital is that we need to get into states of optic flow, meaning walking or biking or running, anything it's self-generated motion. Being on the Peloton, I'm sorry, won't do that in the same way, even though there's a screen, or being in the gym won't do that in the same way. Even if it's just walking, or if people, even in a wheelchair, if people are wheelchair bound, that movement through physical space is the way that the visual system instructs the rest of the brain about the passage of time. Our body needs to understand how its movements are related to the movement of other things around us. And so light programs our nervous system at a deep subconscious level and informs us where we are relative to the spin of the earth, and believe it or not, to the movement of the earth around the sun. As we all know, that the earth tilts, right? Solstices, equinoxes are because of the tilt and the amount of light that different pieces of the earth get at different times of year. And the amount of light is changing each day. Day length is changing, and that's converted into a hormone signal, which is the duration of the melatonin pulse. Light inhibits melatonin. Days get longer, melatonin pulse gets shorter, which is informing your entire body and brain where you are in the trip around the sun, which is incredible. And this is not astrology. This is neurobiology and endocrinology. And when you, on a daily basis, so that's yearly, the trip around the sun, the spin of the earth every 24 hours, and then on a daily basis, we need regularity of movement through physical space. We have to somehow be moving through physical space. It doesn't have to be the same time each day, but that resets us. In fact, there are no fewer than 5 quality manuscripts showing that optic flow, so this would be not looking at your phone or on the Peloton, but actually moving at whatever rate, the movement of images past us, not just looking at a screen, but being outside and walking, or even pacing indoors if you can't get outside for whatever reason, while not looking at something specific and through a soda straw view, but getting into that panoramic view, looking around, horizon, seeing things, that informs and adjusts the analysis of space, physical space, and time in our nervous system, and allows us to feel reset and quote unquote normal each day. So establish your relationship to light, establish your relationship to movement. This is starting to sound like very basic advice, but it's not the same as get a 45-minute workout in each day, because if you're doing that on a stationary bike or in a gym, things that I actually like to do, you don't accomplish the same space-time calibration that you do when you're actually physically moving through space. And animals do this intuitively. They know to look into the sun in the morning and the evening. Again, not so bright that it's painful, but they reset their clocks. They know to move at particular times of day and not to move at other times of day. They are powerfully intuitive because this architecture, the neocortex, is incredible for analyzing duration, path, and outcome, and is absolutely dreadful for allowing our more deeper and vegetative mechanisms to express themselves. And that could be a good thing too, because certainly there are people on this planet that we don't want them to express their deep and vegetative selves. We want them to suppress their deep and vegetative selves. Other people, we would like them to get more in touch with their deep and vegetative selves.
So your reference to animals and their habits somehow intuitively moving in the right direction of optic flow and encouraging us to accompany them and join with them in optic flow and exposure to light at the proper times. Maybe that has something to do with the explosion of adoptions, contrary to predictions at the beginning of the pandemic, that animals were going to be abandoned in abundance when, in fact, as we all know, animals' shelters were emptied as a consequence. Adoption rates went through the roof during the pandemic. One of my favorite quotes was, I heard someone say, so now at the end of 2020, not only do I have antibodies, I've got this adorable little puppy named Fauci. So
amazing.
Sadly,
yeah, animals are wonderful. They keep us calibrated to these very regular routines that are vital. And not everyone can own dogs, but animals do this very intuitively. They reset through movement. And when I say movement, I don't mean, like animals will shake to shake off traumatic. That stuff gets a little bit more into the kind of what is kind of cool and interesting, but kind of wacky when you see it. I'm just talking about getting into optic flow each day and making sure that you're not looking through a visual field that's restricted because you're on your phone while you're walking. It's immensely powerful, and animals have a lot to teach us because their nervous systems are simpler in the sense that they do lack this extensive neocortex that's involved in thinking and imagining things. I mean, we think that maybe the cephalopods, the octopi and the cuttlefish might be brilliant or something, but let's face it, we're the curators of the planet because we're good at tool development. If my dog Costello comes up with any plans, he definitely fails to implement them because they're not in charge, we are. And so but their brains do reflect the same core functions of needing to establish regularity of physiology, feeding times. We have feeding clocks that they expect when we're going to eat, more or less. And there are a lot of ways that one can bring normalcy and regularity to the space-time mechanisms in the brain, but the main ones are the ones that we discussed.
So we have to assume then that Costello cannot tell us how you have changed his brain Can you share with us your understanding how Costello may have changed yours?
Oh my. Well, yeah, we're at risk of I'll try and keep this brief because there are few things I love in life more than science. But Costello is, I always say, is the best decision I ever made for the following reason. First of all, raising a puppy is an experiment in neuroplasticity. It's a short-lived one, unlike raising children, which is a longer experiment in neuroplasticity.
Don't have to
But
put them in college either.
that's right. You know, I love animals of all kinds, but dogs are very interesting because show the greatest variation in specific behaviors within a species. So you have scent hounds, you have retrievers. You know, bulldog is a very interesting animal because they are so parasympathetic. They are so far on that calm scale. Their economy of movement is incredible. They will move their eyes if you walk by, but only if they have to. Whereas if you see a dog like a pit bull or a lot of animals that have been trained to be sight hounds or Australian shepherds, they have a lot of spontaneous movement even when they're standing still. And they're just more alert. They're just frankly more alert, and they're designed to see, more at distance. So Costello has reminded me that many things happen at slow speeds in this universe. And also that we waste a lot of energy in these spontaneous movements. And it's very interesting. I think that if you pay attention to different species of dogs, you'll start to notice that not only do they differ tremendously in form, but also in temperament according to breed. And they've been selected for those unique temperaments. And the bulldog is an incredibly sturdy and stoic animal, but it's also the laziest animal on the planet, somewhere between a barnacle and a cow.
So on that note, sir, sadly, we have to conclude, but here is to Costello, to his continued flourishing, his health and his success. And here is to yours as well, Andrew. The two of you are absolutely best in show.
Well, thank you so much.
Please return to us and bring Costello. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you so much for hosting me. It's been a true pleasure, and I'm very honored and delighted for the opportunity. Thank you.
To our loyal audience, we invite you to visit aspenbraininstitute.org for more information about the Huberman Lab podcast, as well as further references to Andrew's work, as well as all ABI recordings, summaries, resources, and future events. And see you soon.